Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Stirrers and Saints podcast, Season 2, Episode 1.
Excited to be here, John.
This is very, very cool.
Be here.
I'm here with my esteemed colleagues, Mrs. Jen Argue and Dr. I'm not supposed to use titles, actually, am I?
Well, that's
Dr.
right.
Aaron Chidgzey.
You can use my title as much as you want.
Okay,
really.
no worries. Well, you've earned it. So, and my name is Jon Bergmann, and we're here to discuss or to continue the discussion about leadership, particularly with the publication of Brian's book, Stirrers and Saints. He's got a number of refrains about different styles and forms of leadership, and so today we're jumping into the first and what I think is the best one, which is the leadership the leader as stirrer. And so we've got a number of sort of points to discuss. We're going to break it down together, and I'm really interested in everyone's points. But what we're going to try and do over the next few episodes is look at leaders as stirrers or as saints or as shepherds. I think there's 7 or 8 different refrains, and we're going to have a look at, well, what are the positive aspects of that form of leadership? What are the negative ones? And how can we actually work to becoming really holistic leaders, just like you are, Jen, a very holistic leader.
John, it's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
It goes downhill from here. This conversation about leadership sits within a wider context of our faith, of Christianity broadly, and really with a kind of a keen eye on the future. This isn't really, you probably picked up even from the last season, it's not a doom and gloom conversation where we're going, oh my goodness, everything's getting worse. How do we bury our heads more effectively in the sand so that we can survive whatever's coming? It's actually an open conversation about what are the challenges that we face, what are the opportunities we have, and how can we navigate it with grace, and more particularly with hope.
I'd find this quite an interesting area for leaders. I mean, the whole of the 7+1 S's, I think, that Brian talks about in his book are really about roles that he's identified that leaders need to demonstrate. Mm-hmm. And the stirrer one, I think, is really interesting because I think a lot of people listening to this podcast will be actually internalising the conversation and thinking, but I'm not a stirrer.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't see myself as a stirrer. So I wonder if a starting point for this is to be looking at and talking about, well, what is a stirrer and what is not a stirrer?
Well, Brian defines it in the book. So the stirrer is one who's willing to dive in and be a change agent. So it's someone who is essentially got that edge to them where they're maybe an agitator, provocateur, someone who is willing to disrupt the status quo in order to bring about change. So I've got a few points here of what I've done is sort of broken it down into the positive aspects of what I think is a leader as stirrer, and then some of the some of the negatives as well that are associated with this. Maybe we could just go through those and sort of see if they spark discussion. So the first point, sorry, Aaron.
No, I was just going to say the idea of stirrer, Jen, what you were saying. I think that's me.
Okay. You're a stirrer.
No, the opposite. In the sense
right.
that the idea of being a stirrer is not one that I really identify with or one that resonates with me. I'm not really, a confrontational person. I try to avoid.
Why not?
See that in itself is a really interesting way of looking at what a stirrer is, that I'm not confrontational, so therefore I don't see myself as a stirrer.
I understand it in theory.
Yeah.
Sure.
But so I'm really excited to hear
What about
John's
you, Jen?
great wisdom.
To help the audience identify and relate, do you resonate with the idea of a leader as a stirrer?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Why? I think where we need to be really digging in, I guess, and understanding is that it's not necessarily about personality.
Yeah, okay.
Or about the way that you come across.
That's right.
So I think, Aaron, what I'm hearing you say is that you think about a stirrer as being someone who's confrontational, who's out there, probably quite charismatic and strong in the way that they present themselves. But some of the most profound stirrers I know are very, very quiet stirrers.
That's right.
And they bring about change in a much more gentle way, a quieter way, but an incredibly powerful way.
Yeah. Well, I do like the idea of quiet leadership. That when we've spoken about that in previous episodes, and so I've read Brian's book and his book on the tortoise usually wins. That idea of quiet leadership, I understand that. But so excited to learn more.
Yeah. Well, look, the first point I've got here in terms of leaders as stirrers is the positive aspect is that stirrers drive change and innovation by refusing to accept the status quo. The negative aspect of that is that stirrers can find it difficult to operate without something to challenge or push against. So this idea that leaders who are primarily stirrers are not great maintainers. They're not great at just sort of day-to-day routine. They're looking for something to agitate. Even if they're doing it quietly, they're looking for ways to improve, to optimize, to challenge the status quo in order to move hopefully more positively into the future. So let's have a discussion about that.
That sounds good.
Stirrers driving change and innovation by refusing to accept the status quo. I don't have a question.
So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how do you agitate for change? How do you see yourself in that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I deeply identify with the idea of a leader as a stirrer, or maybe just with the idea of being a stirrer. I have done my entire life. I've spent 15 years or so in the Christian space, and I think that's pretty much the role that I've occupied, both in terms of pastoral ministry and theological education, attempting to push against some of the things that I saw as really unhelpful frameworks and motifs, whether it be church or theological, because of something I felt was better, something deeper, something more profound. And so I really identify with this. But in terms of the positive of driving change and innovation, that's something I'm deeply attracted to. It's something that comes naturally, but also the negative of struggling to just sit and be present and maintain the status quo, that's something I find, it just makes me bored. And when I'm bored, I just go crazy. And so this is a tension I find myself in. But the idea of change, I think, is a really important conversation to have now, because the world is changing. Now, the world always changes. So, we want to avoid the kind of generational snobbery that comes along with looking at our era and going, this is everything's happening like it's never happened before. I don't think so. I think the world is always reforming and changing. But one of the things that is interesting is that I think it's possible that the world is changing at a faster rate at the minute because of technological development, XYZ. There's lots of things going on. And so how we respond to, the relationship we have with change is a very interesting one. I remember reading the work of Harari, Noah Yuval Harari. He did a kind of a series, and one of the comments he makes is people fear change because they fear the unknown, and yet the only constant of human history is that everything changes all the time. And so I think one of the key benefits of this form of leadership is that we become fluent in the language of change. And it becomes something that is exciting to us, something that we anticipate, something that we look forward to. That's one of the key benefits. And in a world in which change is really the currency of life, we're going to have to constantly adapt and be creative. This becomes a real strength, I think. Again, Harari, he wrote an article in The Guardian talking about change. And he said one of the things that we need to think about in the future in terms of work and vocation is that we will, you'll finish your degree or your qualification, your trade, and you'll be in a career for 10 or 15 years, but then you'll have to change because life will change and life will shift. And so he talks about, insurance brokers learning how to be video game developers and then having to move on multiple ways. And so for him, creativity and adaptation is the currency of life. And so I guess maybe a great conversation to have is, what is our relationship with change? Do we find it positive or negative? Is it intimidating? Is it fearful? What about you, Aaron? What do you think?
I do like change, actually. I'm pretty good with change. As you were talking, actually, what jumped out to me is kind of just thinking about AI.
Yeah.
And all of that's going to come in. I think the world's going to change pretty significantly in not that far away, which is both daunting and exciting. Like when I think about that, I actually get a little bit excited. Okay. I mean, there's challenges, obviously, but there's excitement in that for me. So I say that, maybe I don't identify so much with being a stirrer.
Yeah.
But I do quite identify with the idea of change. I don't know if there's
That's an exciting thing for you.
Exciting. I probably don't necessarily go out trying to deliberately change,
Sure.
but perhaps it's an adaptability.
Sure. So for someone who's not intrinsically a stirrer, then how do you form a positive relationship to change?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think perhaps always trying to find the benefits of what's coming.
Yeah.
I think I've always been pretty good, or at least I like or try to kind of spot weaknesses or where things are not actually kind of not working as well as they could.
Yeah.
And I try to think of ways that it could be better. So I guess maybe that is being a stirrer. But
Yeah. I think even having a positive attitude towards the future can be relatively provocative, particularly in the Christian environment. And this is sort of, I say this without too much cynicism, but there are a lot of Christian commentators who spend a remarkable amount of time teaching you how to protect yourself against the future or protect yourself against technology and what
defend orthodoxy.
Yeah, exactly. How to prove yourself for the future or whatever it is. We've got to, and it creates the illusion that we have to protect ourselves against all these big bad innovations and changes. And what it does is it diminishes people's ability to discern what is good, what is bad, and what is just trivial. We kind of lump everything related to change or advancement or progress as something we need to immediately posture against so that we can preserve kind of an inherent irreducible core, which is very different depending on which community you have. So actually being able to excavate the future for hope and to see it positively is a real gift, I think, and perhaps one that some of us need to learn. You actually need to learn how to be hopeful. You're a very hopeful person, Jen. You always speak positively.
Listening to what you were saying, John, I wonder if, change for many people is it just engenders fear. And discomfort. So when we think about the commentary that you're talking about, where we're not learning to think hopefully about what change might be. So all of us need boundaries and a sense of direction, and I know what's going on, and because I have control in that space, and change can strip us of that feeling of I'm in control here. I know exactly what's going on, and being able to move into that posture of, but it's okay. Having an open mind to what the future might hold and what change might happen, and how it will impact me or my family or my workplace or the teams I lead. Yeah. So maybe there's something in this hopefulness fear that we, the dichotomy between the two that we need to be really thinking about. If we're going to be stirring and agitating for change, we need to do that in a way that reduces fear.
That's right,
and creates that sense of hopefulness.
I like that word, control.
Yeah.
Because I don't mind change. Well, I quite like change when I'm controlling the change, but when that change is out of my control, it can be a little bit difficult to handle.
Yeah. That's an interesting observation, is it? Because I think when you're talking about the future, change is fundamentally not something that can be controlled. It's something that it just happens, and it's our relationship to it. I guess that's what we can control. How we experience it and how we use it.
Yes, and the skills and the attitudes that we bring into the change. Yeah, that we can actually navigate change. We can manage it. And that, coming back to the idea of the leader as a stirrer who's wanting to advocate for change, ensuring that our people, the teams that we lead, are actually well equipped. To be able to cope with that change and to have the skills and the mindset that enables them to go, something that's different, slightly different direction, but it's going to be okay.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
going to be okay. And it's the growth mindset, isn't it? It's knowing and believing that we can change and that we can step into uncertainty knowing that we're going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And help, and I guess part of the leadership role is helping people to navigate that well, recognizing a lot of people's default position is being uncomfortable with change, perhaps fearful of it, and so embedding or creating a culture whereby people can sort of circumvent that a little bit. Like we've got strategies in which we can see the future well. And maybe one of those strategies is as simple as when you think about a change, write 3 positive things down first before you do anything else, before you kick into cynicism or fear or anything. Just what are 3 opportunities that this change may bring about? So you start by going, okay. So, and I often find that even in the Christian sense, when we have conversations about AI or whatever, it's a new terrain for theological conversation, and as such, it's often dominated by panic. Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
I remember delivering a few years ago a paper in which we touched on AI in a theological context, and there was a person there who was very, very agitated, very annoyed, because you call it artificial intelligence, it's not intelligence because it was not created by God and only God is the only intelligence. And it was just nonsense what he was saying. But it was coming from this place of, I don't know what this is. Everyone's talking about it. They're using words that I only ever attribute to God. But if we just stopped and gone, okay, so this is what's happening. This is the landscape of what's happening. What are some potentially good things that might emerge from it? And let's get ourselves into that space, and then we can begin to be thoughtful about, okay, where are some of the things that this might impact negatively, and you end up with a fairly healthy cost-benefit analysis on change, and we can then take our teams and go, well, this is the direction in which we're going, or this is the direction in which the world is going. We need to adapt accordingly, and here is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So I think of 3 positive concepts about what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, nice.
Andy Crouch, in his book, his latest book, The Life We're Looking For, he talks about technology, and he says, with every new development, we don't need to fear it, but we need to ask questions of it. And the questions are, one of the questions is, what is this giving to us? And the other question is, what is it taking from us? And so he looks at driverless cars, for example, and he's giving us, the ease of navigating one place to another without input. We can focus on other things. What's it taking from us? Potentially our ability to drive or our navigational autonomy. We won't be able to choose the route, etc. Or potentially, if you dive into a bit further and we look at what happens when everything goes wrong and it has to crash and it has to decide where to crash and which direction, potentially it's taking away some kind of moral autonomy there. And so, you just have to ask these questions. What are we getting from this? But what are we giving up as well? And I think those questions, they can be intimidating questions, especially when you look at AI, but they're important questions. And if you start by being terrified, you're of course going to get a big, long list of all the things that it's taking from us. Yeah. When in reality, it's also giving a lot to us, and we need to be able to have both of those conversations really thoughtfully. So really, when it comes to being a stirrer, there's sort of maybe three main sort of tactical takeaways for people with listening. First one is they need to be able to see and analyze change well themselves, so be able to see the future well, not positively or negatively, but well, thoughtfully. The second one is then when it comes to leadership and leading teams, identify what change is necessary and what change isn't necessary. So not all shifts and changes in society or the world need to be embedded into our teams or our organization, but some do. AI would be a clear one that you certainly can't avoid. So we have to integrate this. And then the third one will be how. How are we going to integrate it well, given the team and the people that I'm responsible for? So have I seen and analysed change well? Have I identified which change is necessary, and then create a strategy for embedding that well into my team? Is there anything I've missed in that? What about you? What do you guys think? Is that a good framework?
To be able to do that really well, you need wisdom.
Yeah.
You absolutely need wisdom.
To get wisdom, that's the fourth one.
Yeah, get wisdom, that's right. That's exactly right. It is, those 3 areas that you've talked about require leaders to be able to, sometimes the vision for change will be what they actually see and observe themselves. Sometimes it will be listening to the voices of others within our organisations that perhaps are looking at data and have a sense of we need to be shifting gears here, we need to be looking differently. So it's being able to listen. And then once you've gathered all that information and knowing and understanding your team well enough to know how they're going to embrace whatever this new change is, being able to take them on a journey where that change can be implemented really effectively.
Yeah.
So it's quite there's complexity in it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's a
And the other part of that too, I think, John, is, and it's coming back to what we talked about at the very beginning that you raised, Aaron, around this sense of, I don't necessarily see myself as a stirrer because I'm not someone who steps into confrontation. And there's wisdom that is needed by leaders in that space too, because you can be a stirrer. And it may be something that you love. John, you talked about this. You love change. You get bored if you're not advocating for ways to do things that are better.
Yeah.
Some leaders can go into that because they see that this is the way to go.
Yeah.
And it's really important that we shift gears and we're moving in this direction and we bring about this change.
Yeah.
But they do it in a way that loses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because maybe it's edged in arrogance or such a powerful
or cynicism.
belief or cynicism, yeah.
I mean, that sort of leads into this sort of second point with stirrers, is that I've got written down, stirrers optimize by identifying deficits, issues and inconsistencies. This is one of the sort of the strengths. And I think that is a natural posture of a stirrer. So if you're listening to this going, I don't know if I'm a stirrer or not. Well, how easily do you identify deficits, issues, inconsistencies, and then use that to drive change? And I think this, we need people in our organizations who can see what is not working. But there's a big difference between identifying an issue or a deficit and then being a change agent, which is how we're defining leader as stirrer.
Yes.
I think the negative of being able to identify things that aren't going well is that you become cynical, And there's that old sort of C.S. Lewis quote, which I often invoke. It's to see through all things is the same as to see nothing at all. And, the purpose of being able to see through a window is to see something on the other side. And so it's fine to be able to see what is wrong and what is not going well and what needs to change. But we also need to have something on the other side of the window, something that we are working towards. And I think if we're people who just agitate for the sake of it, people who identify deficits because we see them but don't have a vision of what it should be or what it could be, we're not a stirrer, we're just a cynic. And cynics have very little utility in an organization. They actually create massive amounts of problems, whether they be cultural problems, whether they be leadership problems. And we all know, we've all had our experiences with cynical leaders as well. You know immediately when a cynic walks into the room because it sucks the energy out. Whereas I think a stirrer should actually pour energy into the room, because they're not going to shy away from what's going wrong. They're the people who, if you do something, they will tell you, they'll give you honest feedback, but they'll do it because they have something that they're working towards, something that they can picture in front of them. And so this is as much about vision as it is about, critique, I think, as well. I've always been a person who can see holes in things, but it's taken years and maturity and, maybe a little bit of wisdom, particularly wisdom accumulated through mistakes, to be able to realize it's not enough just to see the deficit. Have to be able to see the vision, have to be able to have the vision too in order to be a leader. Yeah.
And I think that like the stirrer leader is so important in those moments, because a lot of people will see the problems and run away.
Yep.
But I guess the stirrer sees the problems and runs towards.
I think there'll be people listening to the podcast that are sitting in hierarchical organisations. So they may be a leader, but they're not the one who carries the full weight of responsibility. And they can see, because of the work they do, they can see where change needs to happen.
Yeah.
And that becomes a role of agitating for change, but doing it with real wisdom, because ultimately the change is not going to be driven by them necessarily.
Yeah.
It's going to be driven by whoever is sitting in the senior leadership role.
Yeah.
Recognising, I think, and knowing that from that leader's point of view, that I need to be able to actually put a case forward for a different way of doing things or whatever the change might be. But the importance then of those sitting in higher levels of leadership to be listening to that. And that's another part of that wisdom piece, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So finding the confidence, if I need to agitate for change, because I have the data, I have the information, I know that we're not doing this well within our organisation.
Yeah.
Having the confidence to be able to, I guess, confront, Aaron, coming back to your comment, because it is a form of confrontation to go to your boss and be saying, hey, we really need to look at this.
Yeah.
Or we really need to be open to whatever the issue might be. And for the boss, for us as leaders to be going, you know, something, I need to listen to this.
Yeah.
There needs to be trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
That we give our people permission to stir.
Yeah. Well, because
And
having
to
stirrers on your
agitate.
team is a pain in the ass because they're constantly agitating. But I think for leaders to shift, you know, and some people will be listening to that and going, yes, they are, because I have one or I have two. Heaven forbid, and it's never good enough. They're constantly, but switching a perspective as a leader and going, actually, this could make us much better. And for the stirrer to realize, actually, my goal is not just to agitate and tell everyone what's wrong, but to carry us toward a vision. You know, it's a very different proposition, isn't it? Yeah. Because then these goals align. You know, the goal of the leader and the goal of the team member, if the team member is the stirrer, actually align and go, hey, we're working towards a shared vision here. You're going to be able to see things that I cannot see or haven't seen, and so I give you permission to share them. But you need to cultivate the respectful dynamic of, no, we're not going to be able to fix every problem or adopt every change or adapt to all the different things that are happening. But we have a vision that we've agreed on and working towards together.
The image that just popped into my mind was Michael Jordan, the basketballer.
Yeah.
Which
you
of
need
course
to clarify that. Oh, Michael B. Jordan, I guess we could.
Well, no, I'm talking about the GOAT.
Yeah, okay.
The basketballer. So because he would cause problems on the basketball court
just to
have that competitive drive, and of course for them the vision was, the championship was winning, and that was everything for someone like Michael Jordan. I'm not necessarily saying he's a great model of leadership. Not necessarily saying he's the worst, but he would be a pain in the ass for the other team because he wanted them to agitate him so that he could be competitive and have something to prove. That's neither here nor there. That just popped into my head.
Well, I think it's an interesting one because, Michael Jordan, you're right, he agitated intentionally. Like he would disrupt relationships just so he had something to fight against.
Yeah.
Whereas I think when we're talking about this through the lens of Christian faith, relationships are always one of the primary things that we have to value and keep in mind. And I think, I don't know whether this is true, and I've only just thought about it, but I think maintaining relationships is actually maybe one of the key challenges of a stirrer, because they are constantly pushing against, they're constantly challenging, and that doesn't necessarily come with relational friction, but it certainly puts them in the zone of constantly risking relational tension, at least.
I think this is it's almost the challenge that, and perhaps even the shadow side that I see in this whole area of stirring, being a stirrer. On the one hand, culturally, Aussies are stirrers.
Yeah.
We're fairly apathetic stirrers, though, when it comes to the bigger issues of life.
Yeah.
But we are stirrers, and we have this whole culture around what stirring looks like, and it's not about bringing about change. It's just about we like to be stirrers. So this is where I think we need to be really careful in the way that we understand. And I suspect why many people, perhaps listening today, would be saying, I'm not a stirrer. I don't see myself as a stirrer. Because we have this image that stirrers are loud and out there. And I think that where leaders are, our role as leaders is to actually be looking for ways that we can constantly do things better, and that we can take our teams on a journey with that. The only way that we can do that really well, whether we are a quiet stirrer or a more overt stirrer, the only way that we can do that really well, I think, is in relationship. It's knowing, it's creating the trust that enables our people to be able to say, Jen, I think we need to go in this direction. I am really concerned about whatever it might be. Obviously, my background is education. So the change that needed to take place would be around policies or looking at the data about how we're creating our learning programs, whatever that might be. To be able to have a level of relationship where staff can actually come and say, I think you need to know this, you need to hear this.
Yeah.
And to be able to give staff permission to do that with us.
Yeah.
And to be encouraging those who are quieter in their advocacy to have a voice.
Yeah.
So it is about relationship, it is about having a voice, it is about ensuring that our staff feel that they can speak up and be a part of change. Yeah. And if our posture as leaders is that we're just going to get in there and do it and not take the time, then I think we create, we damage our culture. Yeah. And no change will survive if the culture within which the change is happening is damaged.
Yeah, absolutely. So another refrain here is that stirrers often think of the future and can identify possibilities that others can't. That's one of the maybe the gifts of being a stirrer. But one of the challenges with that is that stirrers can struggle to live in the present and accept what is around them. So it's the challenge of having your mind constantly in tomorrow and struggling to be able to look around and smell the roses, as it were. I think the virtue of having your head in the future is that you can anticipate things that others maybe haven't thought about. And it was the venerable Dr. Brian Harris that once told me that to be an effective leader, you need to be able to see 5 steps ahead of everybody else. But they only need to think that you're 1 step ahead, because otherwise it freaks people out. Yeah. And I remember, that's been for me personally, that's been a really interesting dance that I have done very poorly, as is every time I try and dance anything. I stepped into the Christian faith when I was young, 15, 16, and I just immediately had a very different opinion on everything, the way that I was taught to relate to science, and, the whole creation, evolution thing was very big back then, and I just saw things very differently to most of my peers, and, the questions on sexuality, I've always had a very different understanding of that and refrain on that, and a lot of sort of other ethical, moral things. I just came in very different. I haven't had a moment where I sort of reverted from fundamentalism to a more progressive style of faith. I've always been in that sort of category. And I've navigated it really poorly and going, well, this is obvious, guys. This is what I think, and this is the right way, and why can't we just get on board with this? But actually, it would have served me well to have been a little bit more diplomatic, a little bit more thoughtful. Not even because it would help me lead people, but because actually it would help moderate my own thoughts and opinions and perspectives on life. And so what about you two in terms of this dance between the future and the present? It seems to be an innately human tension, but also particularly with stirrers, with people who are constantly agitating for change or thinking of change.
What do you think?
I don't know, actually. I see, so I'll tell you what I see. I see you as a very visionary person. You're often speaking about the future and you speak about it well. But I also experience you as a very grounded person, someone who navigates and sort of moves through life and is able to experience it really well and really presently. And you're quite attentive to what is around you. So is that true?
I feel like I'm in a therapy session now. Yes, I would say absolutely.
Okay. How does that make you feel?
Sorry?
How does that make you feel?
How does that make me feel?
I'm just kidding.
Really, really very grounded, actually, because I think I've never been one to live in the future. I see you do that, and I'm in awe of the way that you are constantly thinking about the future. And
it's horrible. Don't do it.
No, it's from my perspective, it's really great. I love the conversations that we have, and I think that. So I've always struggled. When it became really trendy a number of years ago to set yourself 5-year goals.
Yeah.
And I really tried to do that when it was it was the thing that you were supposed to do. Yeah. And even in a workplace, you were pretty much required to set 5-year goals. I don't have any difficulty. I had no difficulty working in that strategic planning space where you're thinking ahead of, how can we dream about what could make our organisation better for the people that we were serving, the students, the staff, the families. But in terms of my own 5-year goals, and even when I did write these really wonderful goals, I never looked at them again because I lived too much in the here and now. Yeah. And I think it was Brian actually that talked maybe in one of the other podcasts about people tend to live in the past or they live in the present or they live more in the future. They relate, and I think that's right. And I think you've nailed the way that I approach life. It tends to be thinking ahead, dreaming ahead about what can be and what we need to do better. But that always comes from a place of where I currently am, and what is it that I see that needs to change. So what I was thinking while you were both talking earlier, though, was this sense of how did Jesus do this? Because Jesus was a stir. I mean, he was a change agent. My goodness, the greatest change agent ever. Yeah. But how did he do it? And I think he did it in a confrontational, agitating way, where there was no doubt what change he wanted to bring. But there are other accounts where the change that he brought about was incredibly powerful, but very quietly done. And the woman caught in adultery is a perfect example of that. The change that he brought about in individual minds, and we would hope hearts, of those who were watching that play out. And all he did was kneel down, draw in the sand, stand up, kneel down, draw in the sand, and then look up again. Yeah. The change was powerful, the outcome.
Simple and profound.
Absolutely, but it was done so quietly.
Same with the same with this Samaritan woman. He just goes and sits with her and talks. And what he says is it's very pointed, confrontational in a sense, but
it's another small moment. I guess.
Just very small, and he just does it very gently.
And there's so many stories throughout the Gospels, isn't there, of just meals together and walks and conversations while we're walking to somewhere, and it's those little moments. I read last year. I had it on my list for a long time. It's the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's an old cult book, like Robert Persick. And there's a beautiful quote, sort of a pull-out quote, and I love quotes. And it says, to live only for some future goal is shallow. It's the sides of the mountain that sustain life, not the top. And that quote comes as he's recalling us a journey with his son, walking up a mountain and trying to stay attentive to the rhythms of what it is we're actually doing. Like, we're trying to get to the top, but actually it's not about getting to the top. It's about being here with you, my son, and camping and enjoying nature, being outside. It's all the experiences that lead along the way. And I think often as Christians, we have this focus like on the future. We've got this kind of eschatological refrain, this obsession with however we interpret the future and the afterlife or eternity, whatever word we want to use. And it can, if we're not careful, render our experience with the present null and void because we're here trying to get somewhere else. And I think, no, that's actually not the impression you get from the Gospels when you read them deeply. The impression you get is actually there is something deeply profound about the world God has created and the people that inhabit it. And this is our life. And this is what we're here for, to have those slow walks while we have deep conversations about life. To share meals with each other, and at moments when we need to step into a circle right on the ground, combat injustice, confront evil, but not necessarily in the grand ways we see depicted in Hollywood, but just as a kind of a natural result of the stuff of life, who we are. And I think This is what stirrers can do intuitively. They can confront. But I wonder if there are people listening going, yeah, but I do struggle with just the ordinary substance of the day, of the moment, and how do we ground ourselves more fully?
I think you really highlighted a particularly important principle in all of this as a very practical way of engaging. You talked about the meals that, we see this idea of hospitality, people coming together.
Yeah.
And I actually think in our organisations, it's a very, very powerful way.
Yeah.
Food is powerful.
Yeah.
And bringing our teams together, bringing our staff together for these deeper, richer conversations and relationship building around a meal. There is something that shifts for people in the way that they engage together. And it comes back to what you were talking about earlier, John, about relationship. And as leaders, if we think less about the stirring and am I a stirrer or am I not? Am I a loud stirrer or a quiet stirrer? And think more about the relationship that we're building with our teams so that when we need to be advocating for change or agitating for change, we actually have the platform on which to be able to do that.
It's very interesting. There's a lot of memes and things going around at the minute about like office pizza parties and things like that. It's sort of this trope that when someone wants a pay rise, their management goes, well, I can't give you a pay rise, but how about a pizza? Or, we've got a terrible culture, toxic culture at our workplace, but don't worry, we're going to put a pizza party on Friday. It's going to fix everything. And obviously, a lot of people in the kind of coaching and organizational space are going, don't do that, it's insulting. And I think, it is actually insulting to give someone a pizza party instead of a pay rise that's earned or something like that. But my only pushback is actually there is something, like you said, very powerful about gathering around a meal. So yes, if you're providing pizzas for staff as a way of kind of placating genuine concerns and needs, that's terrible. But if you're doing something intentional as a way of spending time inhabiting a moment more fully or more presently, building relationships, if that's what it's about, then that's very profound. It certainly doesn't substitute genuine compensation or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But what it does do is, like exactly what you said, it builds relationship, it builds goodwill, it builds understanding, and those are all of the things that are necessary when a leader particularly needs to come and say, hey, we're actually moving in a different direction now, or we're going to adapt and change in a big way, and I need you all with me. Well, then you've already built it in. You've built in you've put the effort and the time into building that relationship. So for a stirrer, I guess, in terms of a tactical takeaway is, yes, stirrers think about the future, but the future is relationship. Relationship is a primary. I hate using words like currency, but it's primary currency of the future in the sense that this is the stuff of human being, being in relationship, being connected. Connection is a very valuable, quantifiable part of organizational life, having people that are deeply connected. Helping team members make friends with each other has a massive impact on turnover, longevity, revenue, productivity. So if those are the only things we care about, well, building relationship and connection is still it's still worthwhile because it does improve all of those things. It's quantifiable. But also for, I guess, people of faith coming in and going, no, it's not just about building connections so that we can increase productivity. It's about building connection because this is the stuff that will keep us going into the future.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so, as we stir and agitate for change, how do we do that whilst fiercely protecting the quality and the sustainability of the relationships in our organisation? So the final sort of point here on the list is that stirrers agitate the norm and lead through provocation and drive creativity. All sounds wonderful. But a potential negative is that stirrers can struggle to lead well with people who see things very differently. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. It's certainly something to discuss. If I'm talking about myself as a stirrer, I think I enjoy discussion and debate and difference. But when it comes to working and trying to let's achieve something, I do find it difficult when someone has a very different perspective because mine is obviously right. and so I find it hard for them to be wrong. That's a very very real present challenge that you probably all experience working with me.
So how
being
do you
wrong so many times.
Give us an example, John.
Oh, I've got a spreadsheet on my computer of all the times that you were wrong. I can go and pull it up if you want.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Sorry?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, but I think the point I'm getting at is that we talked about stirrers having a clear vision, being able to identify deficits, and I think that just comes along with a fair amount of attachment to that vision. This is something I think is good, it's right, it's worthy of pursuit. When someone has a different vision, that can create tension. And so how do we resolve those sorts of tensions?
Well, that's my question to you.
Sure.
So how would you approach that?
By crushing my opponent mercilessly, ruthlessly, and without compassion.
And when that didn't work, because it wouldn't.
It's never worked. It's never failed. No, I think... I mean, my answer to that is different now than it would be, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I'm not old, but I'm getting older than as everybody is. And I think there's times in my career where I have stormed out of a room or walked away from a role because of a difference of opinion, of strategy, of future, of ideas of the future. Sometimes those were valid. I think there were maybe a conflict of values. Something I was uncomfortable with, something that I felt was an injustice, and so I don't regret walking away in those moments. But not all of the experiences were that. Sometimes it was just arrogance on my part. Sometimes it was just this is not what I signed up for, and I'll throw in the towel. And then a few years later go, that was probably a mistake. That was so I think I've navigated it differently in different times. I think now I tend to be a bit slower in my responses to things. I have usually when there's a big difference or a big clash of values, I have an instinctive response, but I try and keep that instinctive response internal because I know that it will the height of that emotion will diffuse over the next few days, and I'll be able to be a lot more thoughtful about that. And so hopefully now the postures and positions I come to are a little bit more tempered, maybe with wisdom, like you were saying before.
And self-awareness. I mean, that's
self-awareness. Sure,
self-awareness and awareness of how you come across to others too. So it's the whole of that emotional intelligence, relational wisdom piece, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm also able now to identify, broadly speaking, the types of people and personalities that I will typically respond positively to and negatively to, and so I'm aware of that in advance. Not that it's an indictment on anyone in particular, but just I know, this person's, we're going to have conflict because we're different, and so I can try and manage that in advance. And that just comes with understanding people better and understanding myself a little bit better.
And that'd be a good skill.
Sorry, Aaron.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say that it's a really, really important point for leaders.
Absolutely.
And the leaders that are listening to the podcast. Because you don't actually get the right as a leader to necessarily choose which of your staff,
that's right,
which of your teams are the ones that you really, really, really want to sit next to in the staff room and the ones that you don't. Yeah. So that, as leaders, we actually abrogate our right to do that. We have to make sure that we are listening to every voice and that we are...
And at the same time, as people of faith, we often carry with us the misunderstanding that we will automatically like everybody because we're all lovely people. Personality clash is not a statement of whether someone is good or bad. It's just a personality clash, and leaders have them too. And we will clash against people on our teams constantly for no other reason than they are very, very different to us. And we have to, like you said, be able to navigate that really well. What about you, Aaron? Have you had those moments where you've clashed with people inexplicably?
I think so. I think we all have.
Yeah. Who? I'm just kidding.
I don't want to get us in trouble. It was Brian sitting over there. But no, there have been times, and it is tricky. And I think I am the sort of person who would actually retreat.
Sure. Okay.
Maybe that's why you like working with me, John.
Absolutely. I was just about to say thank you.
Which again is something I've tried to get better at.
Yeah.
But it's tricky.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
So, Aaron, from your perspective as someone who has worked in a team where you've had people in positions of authority over you, how do you actually navigate that in when you have someone that perhaps is a leader that you really disagree with, or that you feel a sense of clash with, you really disagree with a decision that they've made, how do you navigate that?
I would really try to see their perspective. I'd try to really understand why it is that they believe that that is the correct way to go. Trusting that they are not just doing this flippantly. Trusting that they have actually thought about this and that they truly believe that that this is the way to go. And when I can understand that, I'm much more comfortable with it. But if I have the opportunity to try to make some changes, I'll try to talk to them or see what I can do. It can be tricky if that's just completely blocked off and there's no possibility there.
Comes back to being self-aware fundamentally, and you've talked about that with yourself, getting stronger and your work on your podcasts, trying to be bolder and put yourself out there more as well. But it also comes down to that awareness of others, and that's the leadership piece, isn't it? And that's also just emotional intelligence 101, self-awareness and self-regulation, and then social awareness and social regulation. Leaders have to be good at all of that, I think. And it doesn't matter whether you're a stirrer or a saint, you have to be great at knowing yourself truly and honestly and being able to then understand others and regulate the energy that teams carry as well. And I think that's the lucky thing for all of us is that's a journey. That's not something you're automatically good at all the time. Some people are good at some things and others, but it is all of those sort of points are very important stages of leadership and aspects of leadership.
And they're probably really valuable for anyone, regardless of whether they're in leadership or not.
That's right.
Having that self-awareness, there's relational, social awareness as well. And
absolutely.
And in reality, interesting point there, Aaron, because what it reminds us, I think, is that people that are listening to this podcast may be in positions of leadership and they may not. There might be people who have a role in leadership or at some point in their lives, but not necessarily their job. We all have the opportunity to influence others, and that's what leadership is essentially about. So regardless of whatever role or position you're sitting in, there will be a place where you are involved in leading and influencing others, having a voice in that, being emotionally aware of your own weaknesses and strengths and the things that your own emotional intelligence is really, really important in that.
Well, look, I think that's a great place for us to wrap up and finish. Thanks for being part of the discussion, Jan and Aaron.
Pleasure.
Thanks for your input. And we hope it's been helpful for everybody listening as well. We're going to go through over the next few weeks. It's just a series of leadership refrains, the leader as, stirrer or saint or shepherd. We've got a number of them coming. I think and a lot of this is coming from Brian Harris's book, Stirrers and Saints. I think there's 7 S's of leadership in there. We're going to give you 8 S's of leadership. There's a bonus one just for those who follow along the podcast. Very, very exciting. So that'll be in a few weeks' time.
That sounds so good.
But we're interested to hear what you are as listeners. What do you identify as the leader, as a stirrer? So feel free to drop us an email, to comment on one of our social channels, to give us a 5-star rating on the podcast if you want to. But we appreciate you listening and engaging. We hope it's been helpful. And we will see you again very soon.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Oh, you're so welcome.